All right, so as a bit of introduction from the teacher's point of view, um, we are thinking about what schools and students need in the future. You may not know, but the BCTF submitted a long report that's like many pages long into the spring finance gathering session of what we would like to see prioritized in schools going forward. And so I took this document and I said, if I'm going to talk about what teachers want in this election, I'm going to start with this, which has already been published. But you know, it's quite dry to read documents. So I made a drawing. I'm going to show it to you on PowerPoint, but I made a drawing that shows what we want in healthy and resilient schools. So I'm just going to share my screen so you guys can all see that. All right, so I'll just do a little short run through of some of my ideas here. What teachers would like to see happen in education? Okay, here's my drawing. I took a photo of it. So as you can see, I'm talking about this, this report that the BCTF put out. And here I've tried to illustrate some of the main points. First of all, a significant increase in funding will make many things possible, and the creativity and energy of the kids, the parents, and the teachers is pretty much unstoppable in BC. So, you know, as you know, for decades, the teachers have been advocating for better funding and for all kinds of improvements, and we would like you to read this report and find out what we think. There's a little drawing of our president, Terry Mooring. First of all, we need more staff for smaller class groups. Now, in this pandemic, we've seen that the larger the class, the more nervous the parents, the more nervous the teachers, and frankly, the more possibility of spreading the virus if people are close together in inside groups. So smaller class groups would solve that problem, but also would solve many learning questions. For the COVID provisions, we're quite worried about what some teachers are concerned about. First of all, we need PPE and barriers. As you can see, I took a little picture of a teacher at the rainbow table, possibly with a barrier so they can work close up with kids. We need additional custodial staff, and we've seen some of that. We need targeted funding for sick leave and for accommodations of immunocompromised teachers, and I would think some refitting of the schools for how to have better ventilation. We think that schools should be hubs of our communities. We need new classroom resources, money for classroom resources of many kinds. We need the buildings. If there's going to be new buildings built, let them be better suited and smart spaces for better ventilation, you know, for all kinds of reasons. We hope the seismic upgrading can be finished by 2025. And we think spaces should include gardens and places for nature learning and all kinds of other new innovative learning that will help us think about solving climate crisis, Indigenous injustices, and various other things that people need to learn. Of course, on top of our mind lots of times is special needs kids. We think there should be special ed funding that responds to special ed needs, not just dumped in the district and divvied up somehow. We need funding for early identification of special needs in K and 1, so that means more educational psychologists and testing at a younger age so kids can be identified if they need extra help. And per student funding for high incidence special needs. Now, high incidences are special needs that are fairly common in the population. We think we need to significantly increase adult education funding. Of course, this has a big impact on the economy as a whole because with more people with better skills, there'll be more people working. I mean, especially in Surrey, I think there's really a lot of immigrant women in particular who don't have a chance to work to their full potential because of language barrier or lack of education, and this can make a huge difference. We need targeted funding for trauma and its associated issues. So that would include counselors, lots of resources for mental health issues among kids, and then of course on top of that, we need significant time and resources for professional learning about trauma. And then this is a $10 per day childcare. I know that the NDP in this last government has been piloting it, which is great, but it would make quite a difference to lots of families to have $10 a day childcare, and $10 per month broadband would be a great addition to the education system. So if you want to read the report that I mentioned, you can go to the BCTF website and just search it up. Healthy and Resilient Schools, it's right at the top. Okay, I'll just stop sharing my screen. All right, thanks. Okay, so I hope that was interesting, and I hope you feel a bit more motivated to read the BCTF suggestions. The teachers want to be partners in education. We really want to be whichever government it is that's elected, we want to be their partners and improve the education system. We felt like we had to battle the BC Liberal governments time after time, and that was not the position that we want to be in. All right, so I have my little draw box here. And the first group that I'm going to say to go is the Greens. All right, I'll put my timer on and go ahead.
You're muted, Jody. Are you going to start?
Sure, I can start if you want me. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Jody Murphy for the Green Party here in Surrey. I'm in the riding of Surrey-Guildford. Thanks, Julia, for that really great presentation. I love the drawings, and you definitely got me interested in paying attention to all those points. Sign of a good teacher, right? And thanks, Randy, for being part of organizing this event. It makes me really happy to be able to talk to some of the points that you raised there, knowing that the BC Greens just released their platform today, so some of the details are all like new news. But I saw lots of pieces in there that address the things that you're talking about, including committed funding specifically for mental health of students, increased counseling in schools, funding for early childhood education, which can help identify special needs before the children even get to kindergarten, which would just be a big help to the education system overall, to have children getting support they need even before they get into the school system. There's increased or committed funding grants committed funding for all the grants, the operating grants for the schools for the full year, and increased funding related to the COVID specific PPE that is available, is recommended, but everyone's hearing from teachers that they aren't happy, that they don't have enough, they don't feel supported enough, they don't have enough materials. And speaking for myself and for the Green Party, we're listening and we hear that. So I know that the NDP has long been the party that teachers look to deliver on the things that teachers need. But I really hope voters will, teacher voters, parent voters, will look at all the options that they have. This isn't 2017 where you're just trying to escape some of the unpleasantness that was endured under the Liberals. We're in 2020, and we've had 3.5 years of the NDP government, some of which hasn't been as great for teachers and parents as they might have hoped. So I really hope everyone will look at the options that the Green Party presents. And I'm going to let Dean talk for a couple minutes now.
Thank you. It's impossible for me to tell here who all is in the audience, but if it's a lot of DPAC people, you all know me, and people that aren't from the DPAC, or maybe some of the parents. I'm Dean McGee. I ran for school board with Proudly Surrey, and then I became the president of the DPAC and the communications director. So I'm glad to hear that with my absence that Rani's taken over the communications there. But when I looked at your list there, Julia, I saw your idea of having hubs where community centers and schools are one thing. And I'm glad to hear that once again, the stuff that Proudly Surrey was saying 2 years ago is getting out there, that we're all in agreement that these are some great ideas. I was meeting with Ms. Firstenow just today. It's great to know that we've got a party leader who was teaching in the classroom just 5 years ago, and she knows exactly what's going on in schools in BC. Part of the platform is to say that we will fund operating grants for districts to 100% of last year's grants. Great news for places that went down. I pointed out after the announcement, Surrey still went up by approximately 500 or 600 this year, even with immigration slowing down, international students staying home, and people keeping their kids home. We still increased by nearly one more school in the crazy year. So our construction is so far behind. I know it looks like our colleagues aren't joining us tonight, but you know, the theme of this whole election is, yes, we had 16 years of things getting messed up. And the question for all the voters is, have things gotten better in the last 3 years? Have they gotten up to where you wanted? Or like the $15 minimum wage, making it to $14.60, are we not quite there in 3.5 years? So I hope that we can see, there was a whole review of funding for education in the whole province. A lot of the points were not adopted by the ministry. And number 4, unique schools and unique school districts. Surrey is the unique school district. Surrey is the black swan. We increased in the crazy year, we increased by basically 1 more school's worth of kids. So we are a unique district. When you look at the capital plan asking for 1.3 billion over 5 years, that if you took that and spread it over 5 years, that's a big piece of the budget added on. I did the math and I don't have it in front of me, but trust me, 1.3 billion divided by 5, divided by 75,000 kids is a lot of money to be spent on the schools, on construction, on land acquisition. And a big part of that land acquisition cost is, again, falling behind for 16 years, not having that land. And now we're looking around going, wait a second, they're building in the south part of Fleetwood. They're building more and more in Newton. They're building more and more in Clayton. And oops, they forgot to get the land 10, 15, 16 years ago. So as I say, the question is, has it gotten better fast enough?
You have 2 more minutes.
I have 2. I have 2. I thought I was down to 1. I thought well, I will just say, 4 years ago, we're coming up on an American election. That Tuesday night, I could not sleep. The next night, I could not sleep. You know what day I could sleep? When the Supreme Court came down with the ruling on class sizes in BC schools. That night I could finally sleep because I felt like the world was doing a little better. But I hope we have a province where we don't have to sue the provincial government, where special needs parents don't have to sue the school district to get the services for their kids. I considered wearing a Team Maya t-shirt tonight. A lot of you in the audience will know about the pink Team Maya t-shirts that some people wear to some of the meetings. And this is the kind of thing where parents have to sue the district. The teachers had to sue the province, the previous government for sure, but still the province, to get things back on track. So let's have a province where we collaborate. And this is part of our policy of democracy, is let's work together and come to a consensus.
Right, thanks very much, Green Party. It's great to hear your ideas. So we did a bit of a reach out to the Liberals, and I don't know if it's technical difficulties or what, but obviously I can't obey my draw. I have to go with the NDP next. So thanks, Bruce. Make sure you unmute yourself.
Hi. Yes, Bruce Ralston, representing the NDP with my colleague Bryn Smith. We're going to divide it up 4 minutes each, so I hope you'll give me a high sign at 4 minutes, because there's a lot to talk about here.
All right.
I too want to acknowledge we're on the traditional territory of the Kwantlen, the Katzie, Kaikaida, and Semiahmoo peoples of the Coast Salish group here in British Columbia. I want to talk a little bit just personally, because I usually don't do this, but I remember being at an STA. You used to have those meetings with the prospective candidates, and being asked this question about what was my commitment to public education personally. So just bear with me a minute, and I'll run through a few things about myself and my family. I was educated at public schools here in British Columbia. My mother went back to university in midlife and became a teacher and taught elementary school in Vancouver, at Begbie and Carnarvon. Now, my father taught at one point in his working life at Templeton Secondary in Vancouver, went on to teach at university. My sister began her teaching career as an on-call teacher in Surrey. Quite the jobs back in those days. So she was on call for about 8 years. Then taught at Mary Jane Shannon and Don Christian. She's now retired. I have 3 children. My two boys attended James Ardeel, and my daughter Gabrielle Waugh. They later went to school in New Westminster. My wife also is a product of the public education system as well in Vancouver. So I'm committed to public education, as you can see, and it's a big part of my life. And I think, many of the things that I'm able to do and many of the things that I've been able to achieve in my life to public education and the work of British Columbia teachers who guided me and inspired me and moved me forward. Sometimes maybe not fast enough, but I did my best. So let me try to answer question 1 and then question 2. There has been discussion here this evening about more money for the education budget. And in fact, there has been. Unlike the previous government, we're committed to reversing many of the cuts that they did. The budget from let me just get my figures here, 2016-17, that would be the last year of the Liberals, to the budget put through the legislature this spring has gone up by $1.1 billion a year. So that's $1.1 billion a year, not over the whole time, but the budget now is $1.1 billion a year greater than it was just 5 years ago. So there is more money in the system, and that's the operating budget. The capital budget has gone from $454 million to $880 million, almost doubled, just about doubled. I'm sure that there's views that it's not quite enough, but there are additional areas that we are committed to if we're reelected. $225 million over the next 3 years for online and remote learning. We have talked about COVID-rated resources, whether they are technology upgrades, more teachers, more custodial staff. We have done that. In partnership with the federal government, contributed some money of that amount. Surrey District received $26.4 million. Are we at 4 minutes yet? Okay. And there are more commitments in the overall school year to deal with accommodating alternative learning options, buying equipment like plexiglass, purchasing additional PPE, and all the other resources that teachers need. So it's probably not coming fast enough, but there's a commitment there. And I think Surrey administration, Jordan Tinney, I'm not sure what you think of his efforts, but I think they've done a reasonable job, subject to your comments on the effort that the board and the administration have made.
You've gone 4.5 minutes.
Okay, well then let's turn it over to Bryn. I didn't get to capital investment, but we'll talk about that because there's a lot, $403 million.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I could speak to that. My name is Bryn Smith. I'm the VC NDP candidate for Surrey White Rock. I've been working for the school district with QP 728 as a safe school liaison for the last 2 years. So when it comes to our schools and increased funding, I'd like to take all 3 of these questions that I have remaining kind of in one go, because they all relate to funding. And the BC NDP, as Bruce has so eloquently put it, we've stepped up. We've stepped up the funding that's necessary for all of these things, for sick leave, for PPE, to make sure that our buildings are well ventilated. We are renovating or building 100 new schools. And the fact is that for Surrey, even that is still not enough. As we've talked about in here, 16 years of total neglect by the BC Liberals has left us in a disastrous place. Earl Marriott in particular The Grandview Heights School needed to go up in 2005, and the NDP government was the first to put shovels in the ground on that in late 2019 when we finally got everything together for that. But the fact is that this is 15 years too late. And the fact is that when we're talking about increasing funding, when we're talking about renovating schools, these things take time. The NDP's had 3.5 years. The average school takes 5 to 6 years to build. So we are still dealing with the systematic neglect that the BC Liberals have left behind. We're dealing with the disrespect to our school district that the BC Liberals have left behind. I know it's no fun bashing the BC Liberals when they're not in the room to hear this, but I'll still do it. So for us, I'm very proud of what the NDP has done. I'm proud of us stepping up to the plate and stepping up and saying that, hey, we need more funding. We need to make sure that our schools are safe. We need to make sure that our schools are able to have social distancing in the first place. We need to make sure that we're reducing class sizes. We need to make sure that we're getting rid of the portables. Now, that's been a challenge, to be sure, but it's a challenge that we're up for meeting. It's a challenge that we have to put a lot of work in, but we're willing to put that work. And we've demonstrated that we're willing to put in that work. So when it comes to the question of increased funding, you bet. We are absolutely all in on making sure that our schools have the funding that they need in order to make sure our teachers can do the best possible job, that our staff can do the best possible job, and that we get the best educational outcome for our students. So I want to thank you very much for having us on, and I really look forward to the questions from the audience. I'm sure they'll be very informative. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much. It's really great. Well, I have 2 of my committee members trying to reach out to the Liberals, and I don't know what happened. So I suppose if they come on late, we'll give them a few minutes to explain what they think.
I don't think they're coming, so.
Yeah, well,
I'd
you know.
really be surprised.
Okay, we had Gary Thind and Stephanie Cadieux lined up, but I don't know what happened. Anyway, okay, so I have a whole bunch of questions that have been submitted, and some of them from parents and some of them from teachers. So what I'm going to do is we kind of took a look at them all and kind of grouped them into themes, and then culled out and combined some and stuff, so it wouldn't be a too epically long evening. So here's your first question. It came from Deepak and Annie Johanna. So we kind of combined 2 questions, teacher and Deepak. She says, I've heard very few specifics from candidates, so please consider how you answered this question carefully, and please focus on your party rather than others. How will you make sure that education is made a priority if elected? What will your party do differently than it has done in the past when it comes to education funding and policy? Are there mistakes you can learn from? I'll just read the questions again. How will you make sure that education is made a priority if elected? What will your party do differently than it has done in the past when it comes to education funding and policy? What mistakes can you learn from? All right, so let's go back to Green Party first, just because the NDP can take a breath.
Okay, well, thanks, Annie and the Deepak. It sounds like you combined 2 questions there, but yes, to my old friends, the first thing that I saw today when the policy came out from the Greens, I went scrolling through to find the education policies, expecting to find it on page 24 or page 30. Turns out I scrolled right past it because it was the first thing. Its top priority, Ms. Furstenau was in the classroom just 5 years ago. So right here, top priority, I can tell you a lot of the policies are about 2020 and what's going on with COVID. And as I said, for other districts, making sure they don't lose any funding. But thanks to our DPAC friends, Jordan ended up creating the Surrey Blended program. I can only imagine how many people were together on that project. But the fact that we've kept our kids registered in the schools because of the work between the DPAC when I was there, and I am not taking credit for Ronnie and the rest of the team, but the whole team the teachers, the district saying, let's create something new because the parents are asking for something different. So when you talk about the Greens principle of consensus building, we put something together where we ask the parents, what are you looking for? Most of the parents, this is speaking as former DPAC, most of the parents said, we don't like the plan the way it is. We brought it to Jordan. I had a 7 o'clock Zoom meeting, sitting in this station, eating my corn pops, talking to Jordan, figuring out how we were gonna make this, and came up with something that that's working better than a lot of other districts.
Thank you. All right. NDP, how would you make sure that education is made a priority if elected? What will you do differently than you've done in the past when it comes to education funding, and are there mistakes you can learn from?
Bryn, do you want to go first?
Oh, sure. I was just going to say, maybe you could speak to the history. I'm just learning for the first time. So when I look at the history of funding in our school district, when I look at the history of what's happened, what I can mostly look to is recent history. And recent history prior to the NDP, it hasn't been kind to our schools. Like I mentioned in the introduction, I think the real problem is that we are now having to play catch up for 16 years of neglect. The BC Liberals were told they needed to build 30 schools. They built 14. Like, Sunnyside Elementary opened up and it was immediately overcrowded. It was overcrowded from day one. It had to have portables day one because it was built far too late. What we need to do after we're done playing catch up is begin building and begin adding new facilities and begin expanding our schools proactively, not reactively. We have to see where the need is going to be and build to it. We can't allow this sort of backlog to happen again, where we're still waiting on a school that should have been built 15 years ago because the Liberals just would not put shovels in the ground. Whereas Sullivan Heights is still overcrowded because we can't build another school near there. The fact is that we have a lot of work to do playing catch up. But once that is over, I think what we need to do is build proactively. Surrey's only going to grow even more. It's not going to shrink anytime soon, and it's not going to slow down. We have to have a government that acknowledges that. We have to have a government that's prepared for that. And I believe the NDP is that government.
All right.
Can I add something there, Julia?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, I'm just building on what Bryn has said, and I'm really pleased to be running with someone as articulate and as enthusiastic as Bryn. It's really it's a real treat to work with candidates like Bryn. It is a priority for us. It is. Premier Horgan says and talks about his own experience. He at Reynolds High School in the Lower Island, in his grade 8 and grade 9 year, he was basically getting off the rails, hanging around with, as he described it, the wrong kind of people. And he says, with great emotion, that it was the teachers who looked at him. He was being raised by his mother. His father died when he was a year and a half old. They saw something in him. They drew him back in. They got him involved in basketball. They helped him concentrate on his studies, and he went on to complete high school and get a university education. He attributes his success in life to the interventions and the guidance of teachers in the public school system at Reynolds High School. So it's a very personal thing with him, and it is a very high priority for us. I think if we're going to do something different, one of the things that we're looking at is the funding formula, and we are reviewing it. There's a report that's gone on. We're beginning to implement it. I know that the TF has historically looked at per capita funding. The per capita funding in BC has grown by 20% in the first 3 years per pupil, while other provinces have only grown 5% over that time. Now, so we are catching up. That budget that I told you that has gone up annually, an annual increase from the last time the Liberals were in until this budget year, 1.1 billion a year, has meant that there's a lot of new money in the system for the priorities that many of the priorities that you described in your diagram there, Julia. So lots of a long way to go, but it is a very high priority for us, so particularly at this time when people are looking to education to reshape their lives, to learn new careers, whether it's adult education, whether it's college, whether it's apprenticeship, broadly speaking. But the foundational issues come in elementary school when you learn to read. My father, who was a teacher, used to say that was the most difficult job in teaching, was elementary school, because you really couldn't blame it on anyone else before you or leave it to anyone after. You had to help children learn how, excite them and inspire them to learn to read, and which is just completely liberating, as we all know. So it is a priority for us.
Thanks very much. All right, question number 2, which some people have already touched on, but I'll say it. This is from Deepak. Surrey School District, which has a growth of approximately 1,000 students each year, has overcrowded schools and heavily relies on portables for classrooms. How do you plan to accommodate the extreme student population growth in Surrey? Who would like to go first? I'll just take volunteers this time.
Well, maybe I can go, and then if Bryn is closer working in the system, probably has some comments as well. We have undertaken a capital program. The Premier in opposition set out a very ambitious target of eliminating portables in 4 years. I think he underestimated the challenge in doing that. But we have worked on it. 8,900 new student spaces will be in place by 2023, and an aggressive capital program. What we have said is, in the pandemic, we will add $3 billion, that's 1% of GDP, to the already robust capital program that we have. So that would be more money to build schools and hospitals and roads, but particularly in this case, schools. So not only do we have an ambitious capital program, but I'm a Surrey booster, Surrey advocate, known inside the caucus and inside the government by my colleagues as someone who pushes Surrey issues. And what I often say is Surrey is the future of British Columbia, and indeed of Canada. And the people, the young people who go through our school system, our public school system, are that future. And so it's our obligation to do our best to build a stronger, more robust capital program that can provide the environment where learning can take place. And it doesn't take place as well in portables, as we know. It doesn't take place as well in crowded classrooms, and particularly during the COVID time. So it's urgent, and I think our education minister has a good sense of that and is working on it.
Yeah, I can jump in and add on to that. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think that was a great summary of where we need to go and what we need to do in order to make sure the schools receive the funding that they need. Having worked in schools, it's frustrating sometimes. I know that particularly schools like Earl Marriott, the cafeteria is not only a cafeteria, it's also a gym, it's also a study lab, it's also like a science lab, it's also a classroom. And these shared spaces just get taken up by so many different activities and interests that kind of overlap. And it's been a real struggle, but I've also seen some real heroic teaching coming out of our teachers. I worked at Invergary, the Adult Education Center, for about a year. And the work that those teachers put in to accommodate the rapidly changing demographics of adult education, because suddenly adult education went from being a place where typically Surrey-born people would come to finish their diplomas. It suddenly became the first stop for a lot of recent immigrants in the community who needed to learn English for the first time. And so that was a dramatic shift that had to be made, but I think they made it admirably. And I also believe that we need to do more to support that sector. So for me, what it comes down to is that, like Bruce said, Surrey is the future. Surrey is the future. It's one of the last places where you can own a home in the Lower Mainland and not go completely bankrupt trying to purchase it. It's one of the last remaining places where you can have that kind of experience and raise a family in a single home. So for us, we just have to be prepared for that future. We have to be investing for that future. And I believe that the NDP has made great strides in doing so.
All right, thanks. Did you want to respond from the Greens? What would your government, if you were elected government, what would you do to accommodate the extreme student population growth in Surrey?
You want to go first, or should I?
I'll go first. I'll go first, Ian. Thanks. I want to take a minute and just sort of recap what I'm hearing, because I'm a candidate and I'm also a voter, and I'm a candidate because I've been unhappy with things that are promised or not delivered, and I feel like we're hearing a lot of that in this campaign. I'm hearing simultaneously from the candidates around me that we are still playing catch up, that we are planning funding increases, simultaneously acknowledging that it's not going to be enough, but it's committed. And so we should just be happy with that. We're talking about still playing catch up for many, many years of neglect, and talking about then we'll be proactive and then we'll invest. Well, how long are we planning to play catch up? How are these, what is the plan to be caught up? Because I'm not really hearing that from the other candidates. I hear rather sedate promises about some incremental funding for a school here or some increase on a program there. One of the things that brings me to the Green Party and makes me want to stand here and talk to you about the Green Party is that they have a real vision for where they want to go. And it's not just about this year or next year or a couple of more dollars for this year. It's long-term investments in transformative changes that make school, that make education better, that make people's lives all around better. Sorry, I'm getting off topic. Here in my district, which is Surrey Guildford, I'm walking distance from elementary schools and a high school. These schools have more portables today than they did in 2017, when the NDP managed to form government with the help of the BC Greens. But those schools have not seen improvements in all this time. We have an NDP MLA, and Surrey's been represented by NDP MLAs even during many years when they were sat in opposition. I would have hoped that that meant that in 2017 they would have been ready to hit the ground running with things that they could do for Surrey. But we're 3.5 years into that term, and I don't know how many people in Surrey are feeling like things have gotten that much better for them. But we're still being told, don't worry, it'll come if you elect us again. Well, I say elect somebody else. I say look at some other choices and choose some people who maybe haven't broken promises, haven't made agreements and broken them, who are making commitments where the history that they can offer is one of integrity and one of following through. Dean, have a say.
Yes. Well, I look over the capital plan, and the best that they can show with the ask for the next 5 years, next 10 years. I don't know how to share screen in Zoom, so I drew it up myself. The population keeps going, and at best, if everything's built according to the capital plan, it'll start approaching, but the population still outpaces what's even on the plan. We're aiming way too low. Now, all these things obviously cost money, and this is what's going to have to be dealt with. But we're not even aiming to get the kids out of portables. We're not aiming to get those 8,000 new seats. I believe Bruce had a number of 6,000 new seats since 17, and I don't have the number, but the point is that's just eating into the kids in the portables. 8,000 kids is basically a medium-sized school district in this province, not even a small one. And we're adding 1,000 a year. We added, I don't have the 1701s in front of me, but we added something like 600 in the crazy year. And there'll probably be a pent-up demand where we add more next year or the year after, if things start getting more normal. So we have to start swinging for the fences. Let's start the construction. I mean, I work in construction. I'd love to see more capital projects all over the place. So let's see, let's take that list. Apparently my kid's school jumped from number 7 to number 1 today, and it was just announced that there's going to be an expansion to Fleetwood Park today, just before I came to this meeting. So wonderful. Okay, you know, sucks to be 1 through 6 that just got skipped over apparently. But at Fleetwood Park, they're way over capacity. There's 300 over capacity. They only had 4 portables. Number 5 was just delivered last month. Because of what I think Bryn was describing, this kind of cafegimatorium where you've got this one big open space that gets used for things. They've got a dance studio that gets used. So it's not just portables, it's all these spaces, trying to use every available doghouse, farmhouse, and outhouse, trying to find some space.
That's really true. I'll say there's no closet in Surrey that isn't being used as a prep space. All right, so I'd like to switch gears on the questions and move to maybe the more current events kind of questions rather than the long history and long future of Surrey. Okay, so Nadia Marchant and Farid Azar are teachers concerned about COVID in Surrey. They and several other teachers have sent us similar questions, so we combine them into this one question. Surrey teachers are feeling vulnerable and neglected with the current health and safety guidelines for the education sector. They are working in the region with the most COVID cases and in one of the most overcrowded districts in the province. Well, it's not one of, I think it is the most overcrowded district in the province. We have COVID exposures on a daily basis in our schools. So the question is, what will your party do to better protect the health and safety of Surrey teachers and students in the time of COVID? So let's go. Maybe I'm going to ask just 2 people so we won't hear from all 4 on every question. So I'm going to ask Jody and Bruce on this one. So Jody first, please. What will your party do to better protect the health and safety of Surrey teachers and students in the time of COVID?
Is there a piece of time that you'll let Dean and I split, or?
No, just answer and then I'll. I just want to hear from one person on this.
Okay, no problem. Well, I did mention earlier that the green full platform came out today, including, as Dean said, the education piece right up front. Probably because, sorry again, as Dean mentioned, Sonia's been a teacher and knows these priorities, and I hear this too from teachers in Surrey. I have a sister-in-law who's a teacher librarian at multiple schools here in Surrey, and I have a friend who is a long-time teacher down in South Surrey. And so I have parents who are expressing concerns about the safety in the schools. They're right to be concerned, and we're hearing that even from the public health officer that we listen to very attentively whenever she's speaking, Dr. Bona Henry, and she's telling us not to be afraid, but she is also telling us to be careful when we are seeing lots of exposure events happen in Surrey schools, and that is right that makes us all feel concerned. Within the specific promises that came out from the BC Greens today included increased funding to make sure that there is enough PPE, there is enough of the physical type barriers that are needed within schools when you have unavoidably, you've got kids, even if you have small class sizes, you've got lots of kids coming in and out of schools. I hope that gives teachers and parents a lot of reassurance in general about the commitments that BC Greens have. Thanks.
Okay, now to hear from Bruce, what will your party do to better protect the health and safety of Surrey teachers and students in the time of COVID?
Well, obviously, more funding. The threat posed by COVID is real, and we are deeply concerned about the health of teachers, of educational assistants, of staff who work in the school, and students as well, particularly those students who are immunocompromised, or teachers who are in the same position. So there has been, I know in Surrey, some effort to encourage and fund remote learning, and I'd be interested in your views as to whether that's been effective. I have a sense that it's been fairly a widespread program that has had some success, and also we've purchased, the government has purchased 1.5 million non-medical masks, 55,000 plastic face shields prepared and given to districts prior to school opening in September, and more money for the fund for additional PPE. I think it's 46 million. And also on the national stage, John Horgan, Premier Horgan, has been advocating publicly with the Prime Minister for a enhanced national sick leave program, so that if you are sick, and this would apply to teachers or other workers in the school environment, if you are sick, you can, although I think some of the collective agreements would protect some workers, but you can take time away without feeling that you have to work in order to earn an income. And so that's in July, at the urging of Premier, and who led the charge, I think it's recognized that program has been announced nationally. So 10 paid sick leave days for all British Columbians. So we have done that. This has taken place. This is not the suggestion from some of my colleagues here that these are promises that have not been fulfilled. All of this is happening.
Thanks. Here's another health kind of question. Public health experts at the Harvard Global Health Institute, the Toronto Sick Kids Hospital, and the Policy Lab at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia all put out plans that were markedly different than the BC Education Plan, with a greater emphasis on reducing the density of classrooms and layers of protection like masks in jurisdictions with caseloads per 100,000 at the level that BC is currently experiencing. Ontario's Conservative government allocated about 3 times more funding per student than the BC plan. So do you believe that the BC COVID school response is adequately funded? And what have you personally done to understand and evaluate the different expert opinions that are available to legislators? Okay, so I would like to go with Dean and Bryn, but I'll go with Bryn first because Green Party went first last time. So do you believe that the BC COVID school response is adequately funded, and what have you personally done to understand and evaluate different expert opinions?
Well, I'm not familiar with the specific study that you've raised, but for myself, I believe that we've, as Bruce mentioned, we've brought in 1.5 million pieces of PPE. We're bringing in face shields. We are investing in our schools to make sure that they're safe. Now, I believe that there is room for increased investment, certainly. I don't know that any amount of investment would be truly enough in order to make sure that there's zero risk. At the same time, I believe that Surrey is uniquely stressed by COVID in a way that the other school districts might not be. In rural districts, for instance, they're less stressed. For Surrey, we might necessitate a little bit more focus, a little bit more funding, a little bit more care for the specific response. When it comes to Ontario, the fact is Ontario has a significantly higher caseload. They've already hit their second wave and are having to move back into lockdowns. So I believe in that case, the level of funding that they've put forward would be appropriate for the situation that they're in. Whereas here, our case numbers are still significantly lower, even on a per capita basis. So right now, of course, there's more work to be done. Of course, we want to do absolutely everything we can to keep people safe. That being said, I am happy with the job that the NDP has done so far with our pandemic response, and this is just the beginning of our investment. This certainly isn't the end, and this certainly isn't the apex of it. We know that we have to keep on working to make sure that our schools are safe, and that's what we fully intend to do.
Thanks. Okay, Dean, do you believe that BC's COVID school response is adequately funded, and what have you personally done to understand and evaluate different expert opinions?
I can't say for sure whether it's adequately funded. I do know that the first batch of money that came from the province, Jordan did some, the superintendent did some quick back of the envelope math and basically said what we got from the province got spent on cleaners, custodians, caretakers. So that disappeared pretty quickly. Some money came from the federal government, and what happened there is the federal NDP, as the third party, went and made sure that there was some consensus building and some working together and getting the federal government on plan. This is the kind of thing that the provincial Greens were doing before this election. I would get 2 sets of emails, one from the provincial NDP saying, this is so awful, the Green Party are trying to make changes, and another email from the federal NDP saying, hey, this is great, we're getting Trudeau to make changes. So all that said, when this election was called at a time when we were dealing with COVID and the kids trying to go back to school and wondering what was going to happen, I couldn't stick with the team that I supported in 2017. I said, I'm looking at these 2 messages, and I believe the one that says, let's work together and let's cooperate. So yes, we've got these kind of things where the feds, the province, they've come up with funding. And how did it come from the federal government? From a third party saying, hey, let's work together. So the second part, the first part was, is it fully funded? And what was the second part is, what
have you personally done some work to understand and evaluate different expert opinions on the COVID response?
Well, I don't know about medical opinions, that kind of expert, but I certainly spent August and September talking to the superintendent about what we were going to do in the schools and communicating from the DPAC people what the parents were saying. And I'm sure you and your colleagues were communicating what the teachers were saying. And between us, when it comes to schools and children, the parents are the experts in their children. And half of the parents were telling us they didn't feel comfortable sending their kids to school. Are the schools safe? Yes, there have been some exposures, but there aren't any outbreaks. Are the schools being cleaned? For sure. Bryn's CUPE colleagues, fantastic job, 100%. But the experts on the school kids are their parents. And the parents were telling us, we want to keep these kids home. So those were the experts that I talked to.
All right, thanks. I'm going to switch gears again. We have about a little more than half an hour left. Okay, last night on the leaders debate, we heard both the leaders of the Liberals and the NDP kind of sidestep the question of white privilege, either by being colorblind or by doing good deeds as an individual, which renders systemic racism as unimportant. So the question, and this comes from a teacher from Prince George, actually, is tuning in tonight. How are we supposed to educate in schools about systemic racism, as well as sexism or homophobia, if 2 of the leaders of the major parties didn't seem to see the importance? What steps will you take as an MLA to ensure that this issue is addressed, even if your party leader didn't adequately address it last night?
Sorry, is this for anybody to answer?
Now, who would like I'm going to take 2 volunteers, one from each party. Who's going to?
I'll go first.
You.
Oh, Dean, I saw Dean and Bruce first. So I'll go with Bruce first and then Dean.
Okay, well, our leader did give an answer last night. He immediately, after the debate was over, within about an hour and a half, he created a video and put it out there publicly, saying that his answer he regretted to say was inadequate. It wasn't, by saying that he was colorblind, that was an answer that was completely wrong and really made people of color feel denied and unwanted, and so that answer was inadequate. I think what he wanted to say, and what he did say in his subsequent video, was that the issue of privilege makes it difficult, if to understand the lived experience of people of color, and we have to, and we should, listen to people of color about their lived experience and understand that there is systemic racism in our society, and the way in which, and it's important that governments tackle it. We have a record of advocating for equity, for equality. We've promulgated Bill 41 to deal with some of our colonial past. That's the bill that implements the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People in law, and will measure all future laws against that declaration. So we've, so I think it was a teaching moment or a learning moment for John, and his answer wasn't right, but he quickly recognized that and spoke about it yesterday and today, and I'm convinced that he will think about these issues and in a different way in the future. And if we have to debate that issue from now until the election day, that's probably a good thing.
Go ahead, Dean.
Well, first of all, an example of what privilege looks like, and not just white, but 50-year-old male. Last year, my winter coat set off the alarm every time I walked out of a Shoppers Drug Mart all winter, and they just looked at me and waved, and I left. Because they look at me and they just wave me on. And it didn't take long to realize that this is not fair, that this does not happen to everybody. But when I heard the story, when I heard Horgan use the phrase colorblind, or people used the phrase talking about him, I remember when I was growing up, that was what we tried to do. We tried to be colorblind. And so when I heard that story, I thought, when I was a kid, we had a black man was our principal at Kensington Prairie on 32nd, now a community center. And the teachers, especially the adults, the parents, tried to pretend that nothing was different. I wish that we had made a big deal about it. He may very well have been the first black man to be a principal in Surrey.
What was his name?
Lane Wilson.
Oh, Lane Wilson.
I know how hard it was for my mom as a female principal in the 90s. I can only imagine a black man in the 70s and 80s probably was not easy for him. The best we could do in the 70s and 80s was to just try to pretend that we didn't see the differences. And so I'm glad that now we're learning, and it took me a long time, and apparently it has taken Horgan a long time to learn that, yes, we can't gloss over, we can't pretend we're not different. Let's learn, let's find out from each other. Most of us white folk in Surrey, we're learning from our Indo-Canadian, our South Asian neighbors, what a fantastic culture, and this stuff that if you're my age, you didn't know anything about when you were growing up. They lived in another neighborhood down the road, and you didn't mix too much. And it's great that Surrey is a place where we can all get together and celebrate Diwali and Chinese New Year's and Rosh Hashanah, and we can all learn from each other. So I'm glad that we're all getting a little more woke.
Actually, last night, the first thing I said after the debate was, what a triumph we've made of social justice teaching, that so many people are reacting this way. It's the way it's the way people think now. Why? Teachers. Okay, I have a yes/no question. Will your government abolish the foundation skills assessment test?
Well, it is not in the policy, which means that the party does not have an opinion, but Green members are free to vote their conscience, which is what the Green Party is about. And I would say ditch the FSAs. That is my vote.
All right. NDP, will your government abolish the foundation skills assessment?
Well, it's been canceled for the fall. It's not a yes or no answer. We're prepared to have a discussion about it, and we are continuing. I know Adrian Dix, when he was the leader in the 2013 election, campaigned on that. It's not the policy at the present time, but certainly there's a view that it should be scrutinized and the decision come to there if there's a better way to measure student progress, and I think there are arguably better ways to measure student progress. But it's not.
We're seeing too that.
Sorry. It's kind of like question period where they say yes or no all the time.
I think as well, we've seen that that as teaching moves away from that sort of assessment of its students, that in turn, I think it's worth considering whether we should move away from that for our schools as well. I know that under the BC Liberals, predominantly schools were designed to produce good economic actors, or people who could go out and find a job and hold a job, and that was the main responsibility of learning. But we've recognized now that we need to move past that into social and emotional learning, into helping our students grow as people. And so in turn, I think that, yeah, it's like Bruce said, it's certainly worth considering a move away from that sort of testing for schools. We can certainly have that conversation.
I have a question just for the Green Party, and this is the last question I'll ask of the pre-prepared questions. Okay, your party just proposed free childcare for children under 3 and 3 and 4-year-olds in the public education system in early childhood education. How is this going to be funded, and how are the children going to be housed in Surrey? We already have a completely overcrowded situation. What about bathrooms? What about the portables? And why does your party think that Surrey schools have room for expansion to include early childhood education?
Well, this is, again, the kind of conversation that comes up if you spend any time with Jordan Tinney, is people in other districts say, why don't you just use the empty rooms? And the answer always is there are no empty rooms. So yes, for District 36, we would need additional space in the schools, in something else. It's going to take a lot to make that work. How do you pay for it? Well, don't cut the PST or stop building a useless dam in the Peace.
Okay, going to the questions from the floor. As a teacher who works in a school in Surrey Whalley, I see many at-risk students who face lifelong impacts stemming from the 6-month disruption to their education. Returning to school staffed for pre-pandemic conditions makes it even harder to meet their unmet needs. What will you do to ensure that these students have the supports necessary to catch up? For example, increase speech language pathologist hours, school psychologist, learning support team, EA hours, etc. I'll take 2 people to answer that. Who would like to answer that? Okay, Bryn first, and then we'll go to Jody. Okay.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, it's very tough. I see a lot of students who are falling through the cracks before COVID, and now with our current situation in the worldwide pandemic, we're seeing that even more. At the same time, I believe that the NDP is making the appropriate investments to try and make sure those kids don't fall through the cracks. I think investing in our electronic learning is going to be hugely beneficial. I know a lot of students who have anxiety and they have certain learning disabilities actually preferred the online format. They felt freer to discuss their own ideas. They felt freer to study at their own pace, but obviously that doesn't work for everybody. So we need to make sure that we're supporting everyone and not just those people. So for us, we've invested a lot more cash, obviously, as we've discussed throughout this sort of discussion. Anxiety trauma needs supports for sure. Surrey has been hiring more EAs. When I was working at Invergary, we had EA class after EA class after EA class going through the training procedures to become an EA. And in fact, I believe QP 728 now is predominantly EAs, even more so than custodial, even more so than safe schools now. So we're really drastically expanding the amount of individual supports that are available for students. We also have to make sure that we're investing in appropriate counseling because while our schools have grown, a lot of the resources that are available to our counseling staff have remained the same. Earl Marriott, for instance, has 2,200 kids, and they have a heroic team of about 5 or 6 counselors who are in there for 2,200 kids. And we have to really make sure that we're stepping up and that we're investing adequately in order to make sure that students have those supports. So I'm very proud to be running with the party that's doing that. And that's beginning to make up for the deficit that we have or have had for the last 16 years prior to the NDP of investing in schools. So.
Thanks. Jody, do you need to hear the question again?
You sure? Thanks.
So this teacher works in Surrey Wally, sees many at-risk students. Returning to school staff for pre-pandemic conditions makes it even harder to meet their unmet needs. So what will you do to ensure that these students have the supports necessary to catch up?
So just to offer a recap of maybe a couple of things that have been mentioned already in terms of the Green Party's platform related to education and spending on these types of matters. Part of the platform that was announced today is a lot of improvement on per student funding, including access to things you mentioned, like these speech language pathologists and school psychologists. There's new supports, additional funding that like above and beyond what's there now for mental health of students, counseling in schools, and increased funding to support remote learning, make those systems more robust for students, for parents, for families, for teachers. And I realize as I'm saying that it might not sound that different from the promises or the statements being made by the other party who's here with us tonight. And that's an example of how these two parties are aligned on some things and can work together on some things, and actually were working together on a lot of these things until they broke an agreement and walked away. None of the things that they're promising you right now, or even the things that the Greens are right now, needed to have an election to make them done. We know you want them. We know that we're going to give the funding. We were already working together on these things. The whole thing being hit pause so that we can go back onto the campaign trail and sit and have these conversations for a month and a half. That's time that these programs aren't being put in place. That's time that this funding isn't already being allotted. It's a very unfortunate bump in the road. You're talking about a teacher who has needs that they're identifying right now. And the reason they don't have those programs, they don't have the funding for that right now, is because the government hasn't given it, right? And they aren't in the legislature right now talking about getting it done. They're out here making more promises about things that they could do in the future.
All right. Another question from the participants tonight. My question is specific to English language learners and funding. Throughout my 33-year career in Surrey, I've witnessed an explosion, for lack of a better word, of ELL learners in the last 5 years, many of which who join us with a varied learning profile. While there is a formula for funding designated students, I have been told by administrators helping teachers in the Welcome Center of Surrey that there is no extra funding for ELL learners. They are funded as typical learners of BC and Surrey. So how will your prospective government address the funding of the explosion of ELL students, many of which have little to no English, some have little formal education even in their first languages, and often have varied learning profiles that include learning disabilities and developmental disabilities? What is your thoughts about the needs of ELL learners?
Well,
Is this for anybody?
Yeah, who would like
Sorry.
to go first?
Okay, Dean, you can go first if you'd like.
well, I go back to the funding recommendations, and number 4 talked about unique schools and unique school districts. Surrey is a unique school district. So not only are we not getting special funding to cover things like ELL and the Welcome Center and the kind of work that goes on with entire families sometimes when there's a wave of immigrants and refugees, but we're at the bottom. We are the lowest. If you haven't run the numbers, Surrey is the absolute lowest for funding per pupil. It's to be expected as the largest district. You only need 1 superintendent. You don't need 10. So there's going to be some savings, but Surrey is at the absolute bottom. And if we looked at this idea of unique schools and unique school districts, this is something to look at, but that wasn't adopted by the ministry. That's part of the funding proposal that was not picked up.
Okay,
Bryn?
someone from the
Yeah,
NDP want to answer?
Yeah, by all means. I suppose I can go ahead. Bruce, if you want to follow up, you can.
You go ahead.
So for me, this is a very personal issue for me. Like I said, I worked in Invergary for a year straight, and I met all sorts of people from all sorts of walks of life. It was a really fantastic experience, really. But, you know, it isn't just people who lack formal education who go there. I spoke with a man who had immigrated from Iraq to Canada, which is an oil exporting economy. He had a master's degree in petroleum engineering from Baghdad. And here he was at Invergary going to school at night to learn grade 5 English. I mean, we have all sorts of expertise that comes in from other parts of the world. We have people who have all sorts of rich backgrounds and rich diversity to bring to our community. And I think that it's certainly worth supporting them and helping them as much as possible. The NDP government actually made adult education free to help to this end. Originally, it cost money, but the NDP actually stepped up with the funding to make sure that all the students have to invest is the cost of their textbooks, which they get back at the end of every semester. So I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of the step that they've taken to make sure that our adult learners can get back in school and in turn get back into our community empowered with better English skills and a better understanding of Canadian culture. I thought Invergary in particular was an amazing school. I've also worked at QE at night, meeting some of the people from Invergary there. That's been fantastic. And I really appreciate the work the teachers do on that, as well as the work of the Welcome Center to integrate youth. So I believe all of these measures are worth stepping up to protect. And I believe that the NDP has. And obviously, like everything we've been talking about tonight, there's more work to do. There's more work to build on. But I think in 3.5 years, the NDP have gotten off to a fantastic start. And particularly about this question of funding and about this question of schools. Like I said, a school takes 5 to 6 years to build. They don't appear in the space of one administration. None of them do. We have to work continually with a sustained government that's stable, that's ready to go, so that we can continue building upon these efforts. And that's why I'm running with the NDP, and that's why I'm hoping the NDP will form a majority in this upcoming election, so that we can continue building on all of the strong work that we've done for our schools and will continue to do.
Thanks. I have a question that pertains particularly to the BCTF and the STA, so it doesn't really pertain to the parents. Sorry about that. Will you and your party commit to a reorganization of the BC Public Schools Employers Association Bargaining Committee members for the upcoming round of our contract talks? This is a question from a Surrey teacher.
Maybe I can take that one.
Thank you.
The issue of who represents the province on the bargaining committee is something that would be decided by the minister. I know that there are some concerns about that been expressed by the BCTF during the bargaining, although I do note that the last round of bargaining came to a successful conclusion and the contract was ratified by 98% of the teachers voting on the contract. So it would seem that if there were challenges there, that nonetheless the membership spoke pretty loudly in favor of the contract that was ultimately negotiated between the parties.
Thanks. Does Green have any comment on that?
Well, sure. Let me tell you a story. In 1872, Prince Edward, the Prince of Wales, was sick. He got better. He recovered. And a day of Thanksgiving was declared in Canada. We celebrated Thanksgiving again this Monday, even though he recovered 148 years ago. We're told that the Reagan recession ended, that it recovered in 1983, but we've still been on austerity for the whole 37 years. One of the solutions to dealing with that was to create the BCPC, where instead of having bargaining at each district, that there would be one local, one province-wide, not local, bargaining for the whole BCTF. And this was some kind of a move to the middle by the 90s government, the 90s NDP government. And it hasn't been working. There have been strikes, there have been lockouts, there have been a Supreme Court case. The province-wide bargaining and the BCPC are not working. So I would move toward getting rid of the BCPC altogether. I wouldn't reorganize the membership at it. I wouldn't reorganize the deck chairs on the deck of the Titanic.
All right, so we have about 8 minutes. And so I have one question that I think will be interesting to the parents in particular. What is your plan to address funding inequalities between schools in the district that are exacerbated by PAC fundraising? So some PACs can raise money easily, some PACs have extremely difficult time, and that doesn't mean some parents are better than others. That's just a reality of social economic difference. So what will you do about that problem? Who would like to go first?
Maybe I could try that, and maybe if Bryn wants to help out, that'd be good. I think one of the areas that I'm aware of which PACs have traditionally raised money for is school playgrounds. And that is, I think, brings in historically the disparity that you spoke of. Obviously, an interesting, engaging playground for children at a school is a really important asset for their social and emotional development. PACs have done that in the past. What we have implemented as a government is a program at the provincial level to pay for playgrounds at schools so that PACs are relieved of that obligation. I think it's fairly widespread. I'm not totally certain of all the details, but just to be clear, but that's, I know I've heard the education minister talk about that. And I think that probably is a good example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I want to just follow up on that a little bit as well. My job during the school district's lockdown as a safe school liaison was I was working on our meals program. So during the pandemic, we continued to distribute meals to families that normally received that assistance, and families that were in need, and families whose kids depended on receiving meals from the school district every single day in order to make ends meet. So I'm very proud of the work that we've done there, and I think that it's clear that we've stepped up. But it's also very obvious going in some schools, for instance, the socioeconomic disparities. We see in Earl Marriott a mixture of wealthier and working class backgrounds in the same building. And you see kids who are very wealthy or have very wealthy backgrounds, and kids who have desperately poor backgrounds. And there's an obvious disparity there. What it'll take to remedy that, I think we have to look not only at the school district, but also outside of the school district. We have to look at the broader context of the social programs that we need, the poverty alleviation, affordable housing. All of these things are planks that the NDP is also funding and is also committed to and has built out over the last 3.5 years. So I believe that when it comes to socioeconomic disparity in schools, schools do have a large part to play in trying to make sure that all students receive an equal education regardless of their different challenges. And I believe that teachers have a large role to play in that. But I also believe that there's other programs outside of schools that we also have to be considering that contribute a lot to the backdrop of learning, so to speak.
So yes, the playground fund funds 50 schools a year, which would take about 20 years to cover the province. And I believe a playground's probably good for about 10 years. So again, I have to put that under nice start. The other thing about the program is, in order to spread things around, those 50 playgrounds went to 50 different districts the first year, and I believe 20 or 30 in subsequent years, because some of the districts are so small, they barely needed one playground for their 8 schools. But Surrey, with 1 kid out of 8 in the province, needs to have more. We need to have a bigger piece of that playground fund. So the playgrounds are part of it. Another part is money comes from the gaming grants, and I would like to see that upped. Now, I understand that casinos themselves have been closed for 6 months, or I guess now we're going on 7 or 8. So the gaming funds may not be available to be upped next year, but when there's money available, let's ask the relevant people to up those funds, because that's another thing that hasn't gone up in something like 20 years. For the people who are not PAC people, I know the PAC people all know this, the gaming grant is typically $20 per child at your school, and that 20 has not gone up in ages. So let's see that double or more. But as I say, the gaming funds may not be there this year because the casinos and those kind of things aren't quite up to normal this year.
I lied when I said that was the last question, because I've been petitioned on social media to ask this one question from Cindy Dalglish. Education assistants play a crucial role in our education system. They support all students and predominantly children with disabilities. To date, there are no standards of practice for EAs in BC. Provincially mandated standards of practice for EAs are overdue. For nearly 30 years, people have been asking for EA standards of practice. While government representatives continue to agree that these are necessary, successive governments have failed to take action on this. Will you commit to advancing the establishment of provincially mandated standards of practice for education assistance in BC?
Well, thank you, Cindy. I took Cindy's proposal last year to the BCC PAC. And again, for those in the audience that aren't PAC people, every school has a PAC, every district has a DPAC, and for the province, there's the BCC PAC. So in my role with the DPAC last year, Cindy and I brought that to the BCC PAC. That is the policy of the BCC PAC, the policy of the province of British Columbia. And right now, My wife is off teaching a night class, teaching new EAs because we need so many of them. So let's bring that in. I was part of it. I'm glad to hear that that Cindy's pushing that. We need more EAs. We need standards. We need to know that the people that are working with the most vulnerable kids are well trained, that they know how to deal with the kids. But also teachers need to know how to deal with kids. I had a young teacher say that they really didn't get any training in dealing with autism or ADHD. And I have to think, well, that's a gigantic hole in your training, that there's so many kids that you're missing if you don't have that. ADHD advocates were sending me messages before this saying, talk about ADHD. So now I've got an EA question, so I can throw it in. ADHD is not a recognized category, and it needs to be. That's the other thing that I brought to the BCC PAC last year. We call it IEPs for ADHD, and if you don't understand all the letters, then ask a teacher to explain it all to you. But ADHD needs to be its own category, and that's something else we've been pushing on for years. So yes, more standards, higher standards. Make sure that that EAs are well trained, well paid, and that that there's some consistency across the districts. And let's get the other districts up to where Surrey is, because we don't want Surrey to go down to some kind of average.
Thanks. So will the NDP commit to advancing the establishment of provincially mandated standards of practice for EAs in BC?
Perhaps I can. I know Cindy as an excellent advocate, a persistent one with a real commitment, and that's something that I'll take up with the education minister if we form government after the election.
Thank you. All right, well, I really want to thank all of you for coming. We're going to make a little report about this town hall to distribute to all of our members, and so that they can know what was said and who turned up for the teachers education town hall. And I really want to thank you, and I wish you well in your races. Now let's just have a chance to say which riding you're running in, and each person can say goodbye in their way. I'll start with Dean.
Dean McGee, Surrey Fleetwood, Fleetwood Park, go Dragons.
Jody.
Jody Murphy, I'm running in the Surrey Guildford riding of Surrey. Thank you.
And Bryn.
Bryn Smith, I'm running in Surrey White Rock. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much for hosting this forum. It was great to talk to you. I'll tweet at the BC Liberals asking where they were. I'll get an answer from them yet.
Thanks. And Bruce?
Great, I'm running in Surrey Whalley, and it's been stimulating. In preparing for the questions, I learned some things, and I've learned some things in the discussion that we've had tonight, which is always a good thing. So thank you very much for hosting, and I'm disappointed that the BC Liberals aren't here, but I think that says it all about their commitment to education.
And Rani, would you like to make any comment?
Just want to thank all the candidates. There's a lot of questions out there, and I think you guys all did a great job. And let's see how the votes are. And thank you again for taking your time out. And thank you, Surrey Teachers Association, for having us.
All right, thanks. We're making use of our Zoom account at the Surrey Teachers. Thanks very much.
Okay,
I really appreciate all of you coming.
Night.
Remember our BCTF report. You can look it up.
Bye.
All right. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good speaking with you all.
Nice to see you.